I don't bow to committees, I don't pay for pools I'll never swim in, and I don't let strangers write rules for land I bought with cash and scars. That's why Gordon Hale, the slick-smiled emperor of a paper kingdom, set his sights on me. First came the letters, dressed like invitations perfumed with community and fine print. Then the cameras mysteriously died, the locks were sliced clean, and red paint screamed across my wall, "Play by the rules." Their rules? When the cops arrived, they shrugged like waiters at a bad diner and handed me the same suggestion everyone helpful gives before the shakedown: join the HOA. They thought I'd fold. Instead, I turned on every light I own and watched who flinched. Because when a private army hides behind city logos and fake inspections, you don't negotiate, you document, escalate, and drag the truth into daylight. Before we dive in, drop a comment with where you're watching from and your local time, then buckle up. My story begins in the gray dawn of Cedar Bluff Industrial Park, when the hum of my security gates used to be the only sound greeting me. For years, that quiet routine was my reward for doing things my way. I had built Carter systems from the ground up, an empire of smart locks, biometric scanners, and surveillance grids that served everyone from hedge fund billionaires to defense contractors who didn't want their rivals peeking inside. My headquarters, a squat steel and concrete structure on a 10-acre parcel at the far edge of Travis County, wasn't flashy, but it was mine. Fences 15 feet high wrapped the property. Motion lights could blind a hawk. Every square foot of the yard was mapped by cameras I had personally wired. The message was simple: this land answers to me, not to anyone else. But like every fortress, mine attracted siege. And the battering ram came in the form of a suburban HOA that had metastasized across the county like crabgrass in summer. They called themselves the Lakeview Property Association, though association was just polite camouflage for what they really were: a cartel of dues, fines, and rules so absurd you couldn't sneeze without a permit. Their president, Gordon Hale, loved to wrap his tyranny in honeyed words about community and property value. I saw through it from the first handshake. Hale had that kind of handshake you instantly distrust, dry, tight, and too rehearsed, as if he'd practiced in the mirror. I remember the first letter that showed up in my mailbox. Heavy stock paper embossed seal, the kind of stationery that screams important before you even tear it open. "Dear Mr. Carter," it began, "we strongly encourage you to consider joining the Lakeview Association. Membership will ensure harmony with your neighbors and prevent potential misunderstandings." The phrasing wasn't accidental. In my line of work, I know a threat when I see one. Prevent misunderstandings was corporate speak for fall in line or else. I tossed the letter in the shredder and went back to calibrating sensors for a Pentagon contractor. They didn't stop. Month after month, the letters kept arriving, each one a little sharper, a little less friendly. My neighbors told me about the way Hale operated. First came the sugar-coated offers. Then came the whispers: your property values could suffer if outsiders don't join. Then came the pressure: city inspectors, code violations, late-night complaints that appeared from nowhere. By the time a person figured out what was happening, the HOA already had its claws in. But I wasn't like my neighbors. I'd bought my land before the development even existed, and legally I had no obligation to join. The law was on my side, plain and simple. I could quote chapter and verse of the county zoning code. Private industrial parcels outside the HOA's recorded covenants were untouchable. The problem wasn't the law, it was the people willing to twist it. That fall, things turned ugly. One morning I pulled into the lot and noticed something off. The gate, which normally hissed, closed behind me like a vault door was hanging open. I killed the engine and stepped out, boots crunching on gravel, heart already pounding. The padlock that should have sealed the gate was on the ground, snapped like a wishbone. I felt heat rise behind my eyes. Whoever did this wasn't just trespassing. They were declaring war. Inside, the scene hit me like a gut punch. Crates, overturned servers, smashed monitors, ripped from walls. It wasn't random, it was surgical. They'd gone straight for the backbone of my operation, the systems that managed client data, the prototypes that weren't even on the market yet. Red paint screamed across one wall: play by the rules. I stood in the wreckage, fists balled, breathing through my teeth. This wasn't just vandalism. This was theater. Someone wanted me to know. I was being targeted. I called the cops, of course. That's what law-abiding citizens are supposed to do, right? The patrol car rolled up half an hour later, lights flashing lazily like they were there for a traffic stop. 2 officers strolled inside, gave the damage a once-over, and shrugged. "Could be kids," one said, scratching his chin. "We see this sort of thing all the time." I pointed at the cut locks, the precision of the damage, the fact that nothing valuable had been stolen, only destroyed. "Kids don't bypass motion sensors and take out servers without leaving a trace," I snapped. The older officer's eyes went flat. "Look, Mr. Carter," he said, tone hardening, We'll file a report, but unless you've got a suspect, there's not much else we can do. If you want fewer problems around here, maybe consider working with the community. Joining the association could prevent this kind of thing. There it was, the pitch slipped in like a blade between the ribs. They weren't investigators, they were messengers, and the message was clear: play along or keep suffering. When they left, I stood in the silence, the stink of spray paint hanging heavy. For the first time in years, I felt doubt crawl into my bones. How deep did this rabbit hole go? Did Hale own the cops too? If so, what chance did one man have against an entire machine built to grind him down? But then the doubt burned off, replaced by steel. I hadn't built Carter Systems by folding. I'd built it by outthinking, outworking, and outlasting every obstacle in my path. If the HOA wanted a war, they'd get one. And unlike them, I fought on principle, not for petty control. That afternoon, I gathered my staff in the break room. They were shaken eyes darting at the boarded-up windows, voices low. Riley Park, my operations manager, stood with arms crossed, jaw tight. She had been with me since the early days when our headquarters was a rented garage with one soldering iron. If anyone understood my stubborn streak, it was her. They want us scared, I told them. They want us thinking this is bigger than us. But I'm telling you now, we're not bending and we're not breaking. We'll rebuild stronger, smarter, meaner if we have to. They cut locks, we weld steel, they kill cameras, we add drones. They think they can intimidate us into paying tribute, not in this lifetime. Riley gave a sharp nod. You heard the man, she said to the team. Get me a list of every damaged system. We're going to salvage what we can and replace the rest. And anyone who thinks about quitting, remember, if they can do this to us, they can do it to anyone. You walk away, you'll still be living under their thumb. You stay, you fight back. Murmurs of agreement rippled around the room. Fear was still there, yes, but beneath it was something else, defiance. That night, I walked the perimeter alone, the cool October wind tugging at my jacket. Beyond the fence, suburban rooftops glittered in the dark, every one of them a little kingdom paying tribute to Hale's empire. I wondered how many of those homeowners even realized what was happening, how their community association wasn't protecting them but bleeding them. As I stared at the shadows, I made myself a promise. I wouldn't just protect what was mine. I'd expose them every shady deal, every backroom handshake, every cop they had in their pocket. If they wanted to fight, then fight they would, but on my terms. And when it ended, they'd regret the day they ever thought they could bend Miles Carter. The war had only just begun. The break-in was meant to scare me into silence, but it only sharpened my instincts. I had spent my life building walls, both literal and figurative, and if someone thought they could breach them without consequences, they were about to learn how wrong they were. But the HOA wasn't done. Within a week, strange patterns began circling me like buzzards over a carcass. Cameras that had run flawlessly for years suddenly began to flicker. Footage that should have been crisp turned into static at the exact moments I needed it most. A technician from my team swore the hardware hadn't failed. It's like someone's jamming the signal, he whispered, glancing nervously at the blinking red lights. Then came the tire tracks. One morning, Riley and I walked the outer fence and spotted grooves in the mud, heavy treads pressed deep into the soil. They stopped just short of the locked gate, angled toward my property like wolves sniffing the perimeter. No one had permission to be out there. Whoever it was had been watching. That alone was bad enough, but what chilled me was what I witnessed in town a few days later. Driving past the bland brick office that housed the Lakeview Association, I spotted Gordon Hale leaning against his gleaming SUV. Around him clustered not just HOA board members, but two uniformed city officials I recognized. Faces from zoning hearings and code enforcement meetings. They were laughing, slapping backs, passing papers between them. The sight twisted my gut. These weren't community volunteers. They were conspirators in broad daylight. Still, without proof, suspicion is just paranoia dressed in logic. I needed evidence. But before I could plan how to get it, the HOA delivered their next message in broad strokes. I arrived early one Monday to find the front gate dangling open again. This time they hadn't bothered with subtlety. The padlock lay in pieces, jagged edges gleaming in the morning. Sunday, my employees clustered near the entrance voices, tight faces pale. Inside, the destruction was worse than before. Monitors smashed with surgical precision, servers yanked from racks, keyboards scattered like bones. And on the wall, in dripping scarlet paint, OBY the rules. The air stank of solvent and smoke. I clenched my fists until my nails dug crescents into my palms. This wasn't a burglary. Nothing had been stolen. They wanted me incapacitated, humiliated. Once again I dialed the police. Once again they rolled in late and sluggish. This time a heavy-set sergeant led the charge. He eyed the paint on the wall, grunted, and muttered, "Looks like teenagers to me." "Teenagers," I snapped. "Teenagers who can bypass biometric locks, who target servers instead of flat-screen TVs." He met my fury with a cold shrug. "Mr. Carter will file a report. But if you want to prevent future incidents, maybe think about working more closely with your community. Joining the HOA could give you allies, neighbors watching your back." The implication was sharper than any knife. Work with Hale or you're on your own. When the officers finally left their cruiser crawling down the street like a hearse, my employees turned to me, waiting for reassurance I wasn't sure I could give. Riley broke the silence first. "They're not going to help us, Miles," she said flatly. "If anything, they're covering for them." Her words cut deep because I knew she was right. But fear wasn't an option. "Then we handle it ourselves," I declared. "We don't fold. We build stronger." I doubled the security budget that afternoon. New servers arrived within days. We brought in redundant storage systems, a firewall so advanced it could have guarded the Pentagon, and biometric redundancy iris scanners alongside fingerprint locks. Riley coordinated everything with her usual precision, drilling the team like a general before battle. Yet I knew even the strongest locks wouldn't matter if the enemy was already in the room. So I reached out to someone outside my circle, Noah Mercer, a former federal security consultant turned private operator. Noah was lean, hawk-eyed, and spoke like every word was weighed before leaving his lips. He toured the property with clinical detachment, scanning each fence line, each blind spot in my camera grid. After 3 hours, he returned with a verdict I'd both dreaded and expected. "This wasn't kids," he said, dropping a thick folder on my desk. "They knew exactly where to strike. Your servers were hit in sequence, not at random. Whoever did this studied your layout, memorized the blind zones, and moved with purpose. This was professional." I leaned back the chair, groaning. "Then the question isn't whether they can get in again, it's when." Noah's expression hardened. "You need more than locks and cameras. You need leverage. Find out who's ordering these jobs, why they're targeting you. Until you do, you'll just keep plugging holes." I didn't like it, but he was right. Defense would never be enough. The HOA wanted me boxed in, starved out. I needed to hit back where it hurt. The opportunity arrived sooner than expected. One crisp morning, I pulled up to the office and spotted a crew in neon vests, unloading surveying equipment just beyond my fence line. Their truck bore the municipal logo stenciled neat in navy paint. At first glance, they looked like any other city crew. But as I drew closer, suspicion prickled. Their stakes and spray paint weren't marking potholes or utility lines. They were mapping the edges of my land. "Can I help you?" I called out, voice tight. The man in charge, clipboard in hand, turned with a practiced smile. "Morning, sir. Nothing to worry about. We're just conducting assessments for a proposed infrastructure project." "What project?" I demanded. His eyes flickered. "Preliminary surveys. Landscaping, utilities. Nothing final." But I caught the hesitation. He wasn't just vague, he was evasive. The timing was too perfect, the language too slippery. My gut told me this wasn't about public works. It was about Hale, about leverage. That afternoon, I spent 3 hours on hold, with the county planning office bouncing between secretaries, until a weary clerk finally admitted the truth. A proposal had been submitted by the Lakeview Association. Buried in jargon about community enhancement and sustainability was a bombshell: rezoning adjustments that could affect parcels bordering residential developments. My parcel. Rezoning wasn't vandalism. It wasn't graffiti or broken servers. Rezoning was legal warfare, and it could strip me of control faster than any crowbar. I called my attorney, Ava Lynn, a woman with the tenacity of a pit bull and a resume stacked with courtroom scalps. After laying out the break-ins, the police indifference, and now the rezoning maneuver, she leaned back in her chair, brow furrowed. "They're testing you," she said finally, "seeing how far they can push before you push back. If you let this rezoning through, it opens the door for restrictions, easements, even claims on your land. They're playing a long game." "Then we play longer," I shot back. Her eyes sharpened. "First, we file a formal objection. That buys us time. But you need evidence, something that ties them to the sabotage. Without proof, it's your word against theirs." I nodded slowly, resolve setting like cement. For years, I'd lived by a single creed: independence at any cost. Now that creed was under siege, and the HOA was betting I'd fold. But they hadn't accounted for one thing: when you corner me, I don't retreat. I come out swinging. As I left Ava's office, the city lights blurring past my windshield, I felt a new fire kindle in my chest. Hale and his cronies thought they were tightening the noose. What they didn't realize was that I was already sawing at the rope. The fight had escalated from vandalism to zoning law. And in my world, escalation is just another word for opportunity. The morning after meeting Ava, I drove to the office before sunrise. The air was damp, the kind that clings to your clothes and makes the world feel heavy. My headlights swept across the scarlet graffiti, still faintly visible on the side wall, half scrubbed but stubbornly bleeding through the whitewash. OBEY the rules. The words stuck in my head like a drumbeat. They wanted me to feel small, powerless, corralled. But all it did was remind me how much I had to lose if I let them win. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. My employees weren't just shaken, they were exhausted. Weeks of disruption had shredded morale. Orders were behind schedule prototypes, delayed clients starting to call with pointed questions. Riley stood in the center of the workshop, barking instructions, trying to rally the team. But even she couldn't mask the weight pressing down on us. She spotted me and came over, handing me a clipboard. 2 shipments still stuck in limbo. Supplier swears the trucks left on time, but they never made it past the county checkpoint. My jaw tightened. That wasn't logistics failure, that was interference. They're tightening the screws, I muttered. Riley nodded grimly. People are whispering miles. Some think it's not worth it fighting the association. They've got power and, well, we're just us. Just us, I said, scanning the room, my voice low but sharp. We build the systems they fear. Every lock, every camera, every encrypted network, they can't crack, that's us. We don't back down because a pack of petty bureaucrats waves a clipboard. But pep talks only last so long. I knew words wouldn't fix this. I needed action. That's why I had Noah back on site by noon. He'd spent the night analyzing the footage from our surviving cameras, looking for patterns. He laid a tablet on my desk, flipping through frames of static timestamps, faint shadows. They're using signal disruptors, he said flatly. Cheap black market hardware, but effective if you know what you're doing. They've studied your setup, mapped every weakness. The break-ins weren't isolated. They're probing you step by step. And the rezoning, I asked? His eyes narrowed. That's the hammer. The vandalism was the warning shot. Rezoning is how they take you without crowbars. I told him about the survey crew, the municipal truck, the clerk who whispered about community improvements. Noah wasn't surprised. Classic move. They dress it up as progress slip in new boundaries, and suddenly your land isn't yours anymore. By the end of the meeting, the path was clear. Ava would handle the legal front. Noah would fortify the defenses, and I would keep digging. Because one truth had crystallized, I couldn't just defend. I had to expose. That same week, Ava filed the formal objection to the rezoning proposal. Her paperwork was meticulous, citing county zoning codes, property deeds, and constitutional protections like artillery. It bought us time, but not peace. The association wasn't slowing down. 2 days later, I pulled into the lot to find another obstruction, a city-marked pickup blocking the delivery entrance. A uniformed man waved my supplier's truck away, clipboard in hand, shouting something about safety concerns. I sprinted across the yard demanding answers, but by the time I got close, the pickup peeled off tires, spitting gravel. The supplier was furious. Your property's flagged, Carter. They said it's under inspection. I can't risk losing my license delivering here. I stood there, fists trembling, as the truck vanished down the road. Behind me, my employees watched from the windows, their faces pale. Another blow to our operation, another scar on morale. That evening, I pored over security footage, hunting for clues. Sure enough, there they were, 3 men in reflective vests, their faces obscured, standing shoulder to shoulder as they turned my supplier away. The city logo on the truck was clear, but the men weren't officials. Their movements were wrong too, practice too deliberate. I showed the footage to Noah. He didn't even hesitate. Private contractors, fake uniforms. And if I had to bet, their paychecks trace back to the association. Meanwhile, Ava uncovered more through the clerk's whispers. The rezoning proposal wasn't just about landscaping or utility lines. It included a clause tucked deep in the language community access easements. If passed, it would have given the HOA the right to build a pedestrian pathway across my land, effectively stripping me of exclusive control. One pathway, and they could expand from there like termites. When Ava told me, I felt my stomach twist. So they start with a path, then they claim the easement is a safety corridor, then they regulate it. She nodded. Exactly. Once the easement exists, they can argue you're bound by their rules. It's a legal Trojan horse. I slammed my fist on her desk. Not happening. But while Ava's legal maneuvers stalled, the rezoning, the pressure on the ground only grew. Anonymous noise complaints triggered unannounced inspections. City officials, real ones this time, arrived with sound meters and clipboards poking around my equipment. They found nothing, of course. Carter systems operated under strict decibel thresholds. But the disruption was the point. Every hour wasted with inspectors was an hour not spent building or repairing. Then came the hack attempt. Riley burst into my office one afternoon, face pale, laptop under her arm. We caught someone trying to breach the servers. Multiple login attempts from a masked IP timed perfectly with the inspector's visit. While they had us distracted, someone tried to slip in digitally. That was when the pattern snapped into focus. They weren't improvising. This was coordinated warfare, physical, legal, digital, a three-pronged assault designed to wear me down until I had no fight left. But if they thought that would break me, they'd forgotten who I was. Carter Systems didn't just build security, we lived it. Every move they made, I would document. Every lie, every forged uniform, every fake inspection, I would drag it into the light. I ordered NOAA to install a redundant surveillance network, overlapping cameras with off-site cloud storage motion-triggered drones on standby and digital tripwires embedded in the servers. If anyone tried another hack, I'd know not just that they tried, I'd know who they were. And I instructed Riley to implement a new protocol. Every delivery, every inspection, every disruption would be logged with timestamps, names, and footage. We were building not just defenses, but a case. Late one night, after the last of the team had gone home, I sat alone in my office staring at the rezoning documents Ava had copied for me. The language was dry, bureaucratic, but the implications were as sharp as broken glass. One loophole, one careless signature, and my fortress would become their playground. The thought made my chest burn. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about principle. If they could bully me, a man with resources, connections, and the best security money could buy, what chance did the average homeowner have? I stepped outside the yard, silent under the pale wash of the moon. The fence gleamed, the cameras hummed, the lights blinked like watchful eyes. For a moment, I let the quiet steady me. Then I whispered to the night as if Hale himself could hear me. You want a war, you've got one. And for the first time, I felt the balance begin to shift. The rezoning proposal was a blade pressed against my throat. Ava had managed to file a formal objection which slowed the process, but I knew that paper shields could only hold back a flood for so long. The association had lawyers of their own, and Hale wasn't the kind of man to sit quietly while I poked holes in his plan. He'd come back harder, meaner, and with City Hall allies lined up like soldiers behind him. That meant we needed more than defense. We needed offense. Ava called me into her office 2 days later, a stack of documents spread across her desk like a battle map. Here's the problem, she began tapping the top page with her pen. They've worded the proposal to make it sound like a benefit for everyone. Public green space, pedestrian access, community safety. On paper, it looks benign, even progressive. If the county board buys it, you'll spend the next year trying to claw your land back through appeals. I leaned forward. So how do we stop them before it gets that far? Her eyes were sharp the way they got when she smelled blood. We build a case showing bad faith. Every break-in, every staged inspection, every fake uniform, that's evidence. If we connect it to the association, we prove this isn't about community improvement. It's about harassment and coercion. And once we prove that, rezoning collapses under its own weight. Noah, who had tagged along, gave a dry laugh. In other words, we don't just need to lock the doors, we need to drag the burglars into court. It sounded clean on paper, but reality was messy, and we all knew it. The next week, the association escalated again. Flyers started appearing in my mailbox, shiny brochures about the benefits of joining Lakeview. Pools, tennis courts, neighborhood barbecues. They were trolling me now, delivering the bait with a smug grin. Riley shredded them without a second glance, but I could feel my staff growing restless. Some of them had families living under the HOA's thumb. They'd been pulled aside at grocery stores, whispered to at church. Tell Miles to stop fighting. He's making it worse for all of us. That was Hale's genius. He didn't just attack me, he poisoned the ground around me. Then came the delivery blockade. A truck carrying specialty circuit boards components critical to our next contract was stopped just outside the property. The driver later swore that 3 men in city insignia flagged him down, warning that unsafe conditions made delivery impossible. By the time he called me, the truck had been rerouted. I pulled the footage that night, and sure enough, there they were. Reflective vests, city logos, and practiced efficiency. But the way they moved, quick, coordinated, no wasted motion, reeked of mercenaries, not municipal workers. Noah confirmed it. These guys aren't amateurs. They're private security moonlighting in costumes, and someone paid them to stall your supply chain. The fallout was immediate. Deadlines slipped. Clients started pressing me for answers. Every delay cost us money and credibility. Hale knew it, and he was grinning behind his curtains. Still, we weren't helpless. Riley proposed a new system. Every shipment would be GPS tracked, every stop logged, every encounter recorded. We weren't just fighting back, we were documenting everything for the inevitable showdown. But the association wasn't finished. 2 mornings later, a white envelope appeared taped to my office door. Inside was a noise complaint filed with the city claiming Carter Systems was disturbing the peace with excessive industrial noise. I almost laughed when I read it. My facility was quieter than most high school gyms. We'd invested in acoustic shielding years ago precisely because some clients required near silence for sensitive prototypes. Still, the complaint triggered an inspection. 3 officials showed up, unannounced, clipboards in hand, demanding access to every corner of the facility. Refusing them wasn't an option. It would have meant fines, maybe even a shutdown. So, I let them in, watching as they scoured the property with sound meters, snapping pictures, jotting notes. They found nothing, of course. But that didn't matter. The damage was in the disruption. Half my workforce sat idle while inspectors marched around pretending to care about decibel levels. Before leaving, one of them delivered the parting shot with a smirk. "You know, mister Carter, these things go smoother if you work with the community. Maybe consider joining the association. Problems like this have a way of disappearing." I wanted to punch him in the mouth. Instead, I held my tongue and burned the words into memory. The real kicker came that same afternoon. Riley rushed in with a laptop, her face pale. "They tried to breach us again," she said, pulling up server logs. "Multiple unauthorized access attempts, all routed through proxy servers timed perfectly with the inspection. It was no coincidence. They were distracting us with officials while their hackers took a shot at our backbone. Fortunately, our firewalls held. But the message was clear: they weren't playing small anymore. They were attacking on every front: physical, legal, digital." That night, I sat across from Ava and Noah in my office, the 3 of us ringed by maps, documents, and flickering monitors. "They're trying to break me," I said quietly. "Starve the business, demoralize the team, bury me in complaints until I cave." Ava nodded. "Which means they're desperate. Bullies don't escalate unless they think they're losing control." Noah leaned forward. "Then we need proof. Hard, undeniable proof tying these attacks to Hale and his board. Once we have that, we don't just defend you, crush them in court." I knew he was right. The law wasn't on their side. But politics, influence, and fear, those were Hale's weapons. To beat him, I needed more than evidence. I needed leverage. So we made a plan. Noah would monitor every inch of the property: drones, hidden cams, even thermal scanners if necessary. Riley would tighten the digital perimeter, setting honeypots to trap intruders in the act. Ava would prepare litigation, laying the groundwork for a full-blown harassment suit under state civil statutes with potential federal claims if we could prove collusion with law enforcement. It wasn't just defense anymore. It was preparation for war. The next few days blurred into a cycle of vigilance. Cameras hummed, servers bristled, and my employees walked with a new edge in their step. They knew the fight was far from over, but they also knew we weren't just targets anymore. We were hunters. Late one night, as I patrolled the perimeter under the moon's cold glow, I caught sight of something unusual. A black SUV idled just beyond the property line, windows tinted, engine rumbling. I watched from the shadows for 5 long minutes. When I finally stepped toward the fence, the vehicle peeled away, tires spitting, gravel vanishing into the dark. It was a message, plain and simple: "We're watching you." I stood there in the silence, heart hammering, the weight of everything pressing down. But instead of fear, something else rose in me, something colder, sharper: determination. If they wanted a war of shadows, I'd give them one. If they wanted to play with fire, I'd bring the whole inferno. Because one truth had become undeniable: this wasn't just about my business anymore. It was about principle, about the right to own, to build, to live without bending the knee to petty tyrants in polo shirts and name tags. And I would rather burn it all to the ground than let them win. We had armored the fortress as best we could. Redundant cameras, drones on standby, encrypted off-site backups, digital tripwires that would scream the moment anyone tried to poke the skeleton of our network. Still, defense without a hunter's instinct is just a bigger cage. I needed to know who was ordering these hits and where they parked their checks. That meant tracing every stray tire mark, every anonymous call, every fake city truck back to the hand that signed the tab. The break came the way all good clues do, quietly in the dark, and almost by accident. I was reviewing footage at 2 a.m, caffeinated and stupidly optimistic, when a grainy clip caught my eye. A delivery truck had pulled up late, well after business hours, and someone had slipped out of the back, carrying a small tripod, with what looked like, when you pause and zoom and re-enhance until your eyes ache, an eavesdropping array, compact directional mic, a little battery pack, and a transceiver aimed back toward the server room. The man planted the gadget just inside the fence, tucked into a clump of ornamental grass, then vanished into the night. The truck idled for 5 minutes, then drove off. I forwarded the clip to Noah and told him to breathe. He didn't. He leaned on the keyboard and started pulling frames, timestamps, license plate pixels, the kind of obsessive work that turns ghosts into leads. Half an hour later, he walked in with a grin and a cigarette tucked behind his ear. "We can follow this," he said. "The truck's route hits 3 traffic cams on County Road 7. If the cam angles are decent, we get a plate. If we get a plate, we get a company. If we get a company, we get a paper trail." We did. 2 hours of feed matching, some creative interpolation, and a bushel of late-night phone calls later, and the route lit up like a breadcrumb trail. The truck turned off the county road, glided past a strip mall that smelled like deep fryers and bad decisions, and finally pulled into a nondescript warehouse on the edge of town. There was no billboard, no name on the door, just a rusted loading dock and a security camera with a spiderweb crack across it, the kind of place that rents anonymity by the square foot. Noah set up a stakeout for the following night. I felt ridiculous watching him in a cheap sedan with binoculars, looking like a man auditioning for a noir film. But drama is a luxury. Proof is the currency of survival. He watched the warehouse until the midnight hour, noting license plates, driver habits, guard rotations. By dawn, he'd logged the faces of 6 men who'd come and gone, some wearing gear that looked suspiciously similar to municipal uniforms, some with the same city logo trucks we'd seen harassing deliveries. One man, broad-shouldered, a shabby suit too small for him, walked in and out multiple times, carrying a clipboard and grave authority in his posture. Noah sent me his description with a one-line question. Recognize him? I did. That was Lucas Hale. No, in my version he'd been Gordon Hale, the HOA president, who smiled too easily in public and ran meetings like he was orchestrating a chessboard. Watching him step into that warehouse like it was an office he owned made my stomach flip from anger to something sharper: validation. The conspiracy wasn't invisible anymore. We escalated slowly and smart. Noah suggested we don't do anything amateur, no breaking and entering, no midnight heroics that could leave us on the wrong side of a felony. Ava's voice over my phone was dry and surgical. "I can get us a preservation order tonight. If we can show probable cause surveillance tied to harassment, I'll file for an emergency subpoena. We'll request the warehouse's shipping records, employee rosters, contracts. If that security firm has contracts with the association, we'll have them on paper. Legal leverage properly used could pry this rotten tooth clean out." So Ava filed. We asked the court for a preservation order to prevent destruction of records, and for an expedited subpoena to compel the warehouse owner to produce logs, manifests, and contracts. She also filed a motion for a temporary restraining order to freeze the rezoning process pending discovery. The clerk sighed, the judge signed, and suddenly we had the law's muscle backing our suspicion. This is when the fight begins to change shape, when informal pressure meets formal process. While the legal machinery spun, Noah and I did the human reconnaissance. We drove by the warehouse midday, posing as delivery drivers, scouting docks. From a distance we watched activity: a string of trucks bearing generic decals, men moving crates, 2 vans with logos that matched the faux city insignia from our earlier videos. I took photos through binoculars and stuck them in a file titled, "Evidence Do Not Lose Your Head." Noah made a call to a former contact in open source intelligence, an analyst who could cross-reference GPS pings, commercial monitoring data, and if we were lucky, internal dispatch logs. By the afternoon, a pattern emerged. The warehouse was registered to a private security company, Guardian City Services LLC, whose corporate filings listed a series of shell addresses and a single forward-facing owner, a man whose name kept appearing in HOA minutes and donation records. That name matched donors to Lakeview. The web was starting to tighten. The breakthrough came when Daniel, our part-time cyber analyst, a kid with a hoodie and surgical patience, pulled a string no one else had thought to tug. He found a driver's manifest in an online freight broker's cache with a license plate that matched our traffic cam grain. The manifest included the warehouse address and a contact number. I called it from my office, pretending to be an anxious supplier, and the voice on the line barked back with a clipped professionalism that suggested this wasn't his first dance. I asked if they did municipal work. He said yes. I asked if they ever did community security assessments. He hemmed, then said, "We do what we're paid to do." That was enough. Armed with those calls, Noah's photos, Daniel's manifest, and Ava's subpoenas, we had a map. The HOA used a private security firm, Guardian City, as its muscle. Guardian City used faux municipal branding to manipulate deliveries and plant listening devices. Payments flowed through shell companies that, when traced, led back to campaign coffers and HOA treasuries. The chain of causation was thin in spots, but it was thread enough to pull. Ava served the subpoena personally. There's a delicious moment in power moves when a stack of papers shows up and the recipient pretends surprise. The warehouse manager, an annoyed man with a neck too pink for his accent, took the subpoena like it was a paper cut, but worse. He promised cooperation while fumbling for his lawyer's number. Under the preservation order, we also demanded digital backups of security camera footage. He hesitated, and that hesitation looked like guilt caught mid-step. While paperwork moved, the local paper caught wind. A freelancer at the Tribune called, smelled the drama, and asked for a comment. I didn't give one, but Ava's motion and the subpoena were public records now. Curiosity is oxygen for the press. Words started to leak. Hale's smile at HOA meetings got a little stiffer. The real test was waiting for the court's response to Ava's emergency motion. If the judge refused to expedite, the warehouse could glibly scrub logs, rotate hard drives, and we'd have nothing but a detective story with blank pages. But the judge understood what intimidation looked like on paper. The pattern of vandalism, blocked deliveries, and fabricated inspections was persuasive when compiled with our traffic cam tracing. When the judge signed the expedited subpoena and granted the preservation order, Ava let herself smile for the first time in weeks. "We've got them on the run," she said. "Now we let process do the work." I tasted victory, and it was coppery and cautious. Over the next 48 hours, the warehouse delivered more than we hoped. The manifests showed transports of surveillance gear around the dates of our incidents. Payment ledgers awkwardly labeled consulting fees matched check numbers deposited into accounts tied to HOA treasuries. Emails turned up tangentially at first, a vendor thanking G. Hale for prompt payment, then more explicit a chain, discussing neutralizing the target with timestamp directives. One line in particular read like a punch to the face. Make sure the subject receives a clear message. No arrests necessary. Disrupt supply. The language was ugly, precise, and undeniable. Ava folded the printouts into an evidence packet and walked into the prosecutor's office. We'd done the thing you hope to do, but rarely succeed at. We turned whispers into documents and suspicion into a paper trail. The prosecutor didn't need long. He called us back within hours, and for the first time since this started, I saw worry on the other side of the street. We hadn't won. Not yet. But for the first time, the people who'd been using city logos and fake uniforms had to explain themselves in the glare of subpoenas and criminal investigations. The rusted warehouse had been pried open by law, and inside we'd found the gears of a machine built to bully. That night, standing outside my office watching the drones circle like lazy satellites, I allowed myself a momentary grin. We'd exposed a vein, now the blood would follow. I lit a cigarette habit, not solace, and felt the world tilt a fraction toward rightness. If this was a campaign to break me, they'd miscalculated. We'd baited a trap with evidence and patience, and the trap had snapped shut. The next steps would be louder indictments, freezing of accounts, maybe even arrests. But I reminded myself it would also get messy. They'd lash out. When people with power lose it, they strike hardest. So we prepared. We buttressed our legal filings, tightened our logs, and made copies of everything in triplicate. I slept badly, but slept with a plan. The war had entered a courtroom now, and that meant the stakes were higher than ever. We were no longer just defending a company. We were prosecuting a corruption that had dressed itself up as neighborhood stewardship, and I was ready to watch it burn. The morning the subpoenas landed, silence settled over Cedar Bluff, like the pause before a storm. For weeks I had lived with chaos, broken locks, overturned crates, threats sprayed on walls, but now the noise shifted to something quieter, more dangerous. The HOA wasn't retreating, they were recalibrating. Riley was the first to spot the change. She came into my office carrying a tablet, eyes locked on the drone feed. "Look at this," she said, dropping into a chair. On the screen, a convoy of city-marked trucks rolled up to the edge of our property line. No vandal masks this time, no shadows in the night, just men in reflective vests unloading surveying equipment in broad daylight. They hammered stakes into the ground, painted lines across the dirt, and planted orange flags that looked like landmines to my patience. I stormed outside, Noah at my side. The man in charge was tall, clipboard in hand, with a municipal logo stitched on his jacket. His tone was brisk, professional. "Morning, sir. We're conducting assessments for an infrastructure project." "What project?" I demanded. "Preliminary surveys, landscaping utilities, pedestrian easements. Nothing final." I stared at the orange flags dotting the ground, every one of them marching closer to my fence. The timing was too precise. The paperwork we had filed, the subpoenas Ava had served, it was no coincidence these men showed up now. When I pressed for details, the supervisor hesitated, then gave me a thin smile. You'd have to ask the association. We're just contractors. That was enough. We recorded every second of the encounter: names, truck numbers, GPS tags. Riley saved the footage to 3 separate servers. That afternoon, Ava confirmed what I already suspected. The association's behind this, she said over the phone, her voice clipped. They filed for a rezoning overlay, citing public safety corridors. If approved, it would carve a pathway right through your land. Once they have an easement, they can expand it, regulate it, control it. This is a Trojan horse. I tightened my grip on the phone. So what's our move? We escalate. We've got your objection on record, but now we file for an injunction to freeze the rezoning process until discovery is complete. And while the paperwork churns, you need to gather evidence. Not suspicions. Proof. Surveillance documents, anything tying Hale and his board to these contractors. Her words had the sting of command, and I knew she was right. Defense had bought us time. Offense would win the war. That night, Noah and I parked a safe distance from the warehouse we'd tracked the surveillance truck to. The lot glowed under harsh sodium lights, buzzing like angry wasps. Men moved in and out, carrying crates under heavy guard. A drone hovered overhead, its quiet whir blending with the night air. Through its camera, we saw what the human eye couldn't: logos, half scraped off the trucks, faded city insignias that matched the uniforms we'd seen blocking deliveries. And then the jackpot. Gordon Hale himself stepping through the side door, his pressed shirt catching the light. He wasn't there to supervise landscaping. He was coordinating a private army. I clenched my fists on the steering wheel, but Noah stopped me before anger could override judgment. We don't kick in doors, he warned. We document. We need them to hang themselves with their own rope. So we recorded everything: license plates, timestamps, photos of Hale entering the warehouse, screenshots of trucks carrying surveillance gear. Ava would stitch it into a narrative so airtight it would choke the association's lawyers in court. Meanwhile, the pressure on my team was grinding them down. The next morning, inspectors arrived again, this time claiming they'd received anonymous tips about chemical runoff from my facility. My company didn't use chemicals, not so much as a gallon of paint thinner. Still, the inspectors combed through the property, snapping pictures, demanding records. Production halted again. My employees muttered under their breath, their nerves fraying. That evening, Riley cornered me in the hall, her voice low. We're running out of time, Miles. The team's exhausted. People are asking whether staying here is worth it. I didn't lie to her. It's serious. But we're close. Ava's injunction is in motion. Noah's tracing every truck that touches that warehouse. If we can hold together a little longer, the whole thing cracks open. She nodded, but doubt lingered in her eyes. Days blurred into nights as the harassment continued. Flyers, complaints, surprise inspections. The association thought they could bury me in bureaucracy until I suffocated, but every move they made we documented. Every call was logged, every inspector's visit time-stamped. We built a file thicker than a phone book. The turning point came when Noah intercepted a stream of emails routed through an unsecured server tied to Guardian City Services, the private security firm masquerading as city contractors. The emails weren't polite. They were tactical. One read, "Subject remains non-compliant. Recommend escalating disruptions until supply chain collapses. Priority acquisition target status confirmed." Another, "Ensure presence of city insignia during blockade." Creates plausible deniability. And then the most damning line of all. Per Hale's directive, neutralize Carter Systems as operational threat. No arrests. Maximum disruption. Noah printed the emails and dropped them on my desk. "This is it," he said. The smoking gun. I sat there staring at the pages, my jaw tight. It was all there, the link between Hale, the association, and the mercenaries posing as city officials. Proof that the break-ins, the block shipments, the inspections weren't random. They were orchestrated. I called Ava immediately. Her voice lit up with the rare edge of triumph. "This is more than harassment," she said. "This is conspiracy. With these emails, we can demand discovery of the association's financials. If payments match the dates of these incidents, it's over for them." But Hale wasn't going to let us deliver that blow without counterpunching. The very next evening, alarms blared across my property. I rushed to the monitors and watched as a group of masked men cut through the fence and stormed the yard with surgical precision. They bypassed the obvious cameras, heading straight for our main power supply. Sparks flew as they ripped out cables, plunging half the building into darkness. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, the intruders were gone. Once again, the officers shrugged, muttering about possible competitors and industrial sabotage. One even had the audacity to repeat the line I'd heard too many times. "You know, these things wouldn't happen if you were working with the community. Their complicity was so blatant, it almost made me laugh. Almost. I turned back to Riley and Noah, my fists trembling with fury. Enough defense. It's time to drag them into the light. Over the following week, Ava filed a motion to subpoena the association's bank records. To our surprise, the judge granted it, likely swayed by the growing pile of evidence we'd already compiled. The financials were a goldmine. Payments labeled consulting fees lined up perfectly with the dates of the break-ins, the delivery blockades, the fake inspections. Transfers routed through shell companies eventually landed in Guardian City's accounts, and Hale's name appeared on authorization signatures. The puzzle pieces clicked together into a picture so clear it almost glowed. At the same time, we stepped up our own surveillance of the warehouse. One night, the drone captured footage of Guardian City trucks unloading equipment marked with municipal logos. Alongside them stood several HOA board members, clipboards in hand, directing operations. It was a tableau of corruption neighborhood, busybodies turned warlords. When I watched that footage play back, my anger finally shifted to something colder, steadier. Victory wasn't a dream anymore. It was inevitable. The association tried one last gambit. Hale sent me a cease and desist order accusing me of defamation for baseless attacks against the community. Ava laughed when she saw it. "This is desperation," she said. "They're trying to flip the narrative, make you the aggressor. But with these financials, those emails, and the warehouse footage, they don't stand a chance." For the first time in months, I felt air return to my lungs. I stood outside my office that night, the hum of repaired generators behind me, and looked out at the fence line where orange survey flags still fluttered. They thought they could mark my land like conquerors planting banners. But the tide was turning. Riley came out to join me, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "So what's next?" she asked. I took a slow sip, the bitter taste grounding me. "Next," I said, "we stop playing defense. We drag them into court, strip them of their power, and make sure everyone sees exactly what they are." She nodded, a grim smile spreading across her face. The battle for Cedar Bluff was no longer in the shadows. It was about to explode into the open. By the time Ava filed the subpoena for the association's financials, I knew we were entering the endgame. They had pushed me to the brink, smashed servers, vandalized property, staged inspections, sabotaged deliveries, and still I hadn't broken. Now we had their emails, their shell companies, their paper trail of payments. It was only a matter of time before the gavel fell. But desperate people make desperate moves. And Hale wasn't just desperate. He was cornered. It began with the bank call. My accounts, both business and personal, had been frozen pending financial impropriety investigations. The voice on the phone was careful, measured, like he was reading off a script. "We've received multiple complaints regarding Carter systems. Regulatory review requires we place a temporary hold." I nearly crushed the receiver in my hand. Complaints from who? He hesitated. "Confidential sources." I didn't need names. I could see Hale's fingerprints all over it. "Cut off my cash flow, starve my contracts, and maybe I'd fold under the pressure," I called Ava. Her tone was steady, but edged with frustration. "They're hitting you where it hurts. This isn't just harassment, it's financial warfare. We'll move fast, but it'll take time to prove the allegations are fabricated. In the meantime, lean on your partners. Buy yourself breathing room." Humiliating as it was, I called in favors. A logistics partner extended my credit. A supplier agreed to delay invoices. Pride is a luxury when survival's on the line. Still, I knew the HOA wasn't done. That night, alarms screamed again. I sprinted to the monitors and saw masked intruders moving through the facility with surgical precision. They weren't vandals, they were saboteurs. Tools in hand, they dismantled key equipment targeting power relays and server racks. Their movements were timed, disciplined. By the time the police arrived late, as always, the intruders had vanished into the night. The officer's shrug was almost comical. "Looks like industrial sabotage. Maybe competitors trying to slow you down." I laughed bitterly. "You've got to be kidding me. Competitors dressed like city inspectors. Do you people even pretend anymore?" He just muttered about filing a report and suggested again that joining the association could smooth these things over. It was theater, and I was done playing the audience. The next morning, Ava delivered the hammer. "The financials came through," she said, slamming a thick folder onto my desk. Guardian City Services was paid through a chain of shell companies, all tied back to Lakeview's treasury. Payments labeled consulting fees match. The dates of the break-ins, inspections, and blockades. And look at this. She flipped to a page. Hale's name in neat script authorizing a payment memo, special operations. I stared at it, fury boiling cold in my veins. Proof. Finally, undeniable proof. But Noah wasn't satisfied. Paper trails are good, but juries love pictures. We need them on tape in the act. So we doubled down on surveillance. Drones circled the warehouse nightly. Hidden cameras recorded every truck, every clipboard, every handoff. And then one evening, the jackpot arrived: footage of Hale himself walking alongside Guardian City guards, pointing at crates as they unloaded surveillance equipment. A board member held a checklist. Another man, face partially obscured, handed over envelopes. When the footage played back, silence filled the room. Then Noah exhaled. That's it. That's the nail in their coffin. Still, Hale wasn't going quietly. A few days later, a courier delivered a cease and desist order accusing me of defamation and harassment. The document threatened further legal action if I didn't drop my claims and apologize publicly. Ava skimmed it and smirked. This is intimidation, plain and simple. They're trying to flip the narrative, make you the aggressor. But with these records, they don't have a leg to stand on. Then we push harder, I said. And we did. Ava filed a lawsuit accusing the HOA of conspiracy, harassment, and malicious interference with business. We attached the emails, the bank records, the warehouse footage. She also filed for an emergency injunction to freeze the HOA's accounts and halt the rezoning proposal. The judge set a hearing. The date was circled in red on my calendar like a promise. In the days leading up to the hearing, the harassment peaked. Inspectors appeared daily, citing phantom violations. Flyers littered my mailbox. Trucks circled the block at night, headlights off, engines idling. But we weren't the ones rattling anymore. They were. One night, Riley came into my office holding a stack of screenshots. "Look at this," she said. "Someone had tried to breach our server again. But this time, our honeypot caught them. The IP traced back to Guardian City's network. Direct, irrefutable." I laughed loud, real, almost giddy. They weren't just sloppy. They were reckless. Save everything, I told her. Tomorrow we bury them. The courthouse was packed the morning of the hearing. Reporters filled the benches, cameras flashing like fireworks. Hale sat across the room, jaw tight, his once slick smile replaced by a mask of stone. His lawyers whispered frantically in his ear. Ava stood tall, voice clear as a bell, and laid out the timeline, the vandalism, the sabotage, the false inspections. She showed the bank records, the payment memos, the warehouse footage. Then she delivered the kill shot, the emails instructing Guardian City to neutralize Carter Systems as an operational threat. When the footage of Hale at the warehouse played, a murmur rippled through the courtroom. Even the judge's face darkened. Hale's lawyer tried to argue the evidence was circumstantial, that Guardian City was an independent contractor, that the payments were routine. Then Ava revealed the server logs Riley had caught tracing the hack attempt directly back to Guardian City's network. The timing lined up perfectly with the inspections. Coincidence? Ava asked, her voice like a whip. Or coordination? The courtroom was silent. The judge leaned forward, eyes locked on Hale. "I've seen enough." He granted the injunction on the spot. HOA accounts frozen, rezoning proposal terminated, Guardian City under investigation. He also ordered an independent administrator to oversee the association's operations, pending the outcome of criminal inquiries. For the first time in months, the weight on my chest lifted. We hadn't just defended ourselves, we'd dragged them into the light. Outside, the courthouse reporters swarmed. I didn't give speeches or victory poses. I just said one thing: no one should have to fight this hard to keep what they already own. Then I walked away. That night, standing outside my office under the glow of the repaired floodlights, I watched the yard stretch quiet and whole again. For weeks it had been a battlefield. Now it was just land, my land. Riley joined me, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "We did it." I shook my head. "No, we survived. The real fight is making sure they never do this to anyone else again." She nodded, her expression hardening. Because this war wasn't just about Carter Systems. It was about drawing a line and daring anyone to cross it. The courthouse victory should have felt like the finish line, but in truth, it was only the beginning of the fallout. By the next morning, every local news outlet carried the story. Words like corruption, fraud, and harassment splashed across headlines. The association, once portrayed as a benevolent guardian of property values, was now a wolf pack exposed in broad daylight. And Gordon Hale, the man who had grinned through every invitation letter and veiled threat, was the face on every front page, no longer the polished HOA president, but the architect of a conspiracy. At Carter Systems, the mood shifted almost overnight. My employees, once haggard from weeks of harassment, walked with their heads high again. Riley pinned a copy of the judge's injunction to the break room wall like a trophy. "Proof," she said with a smirk. We weren't paranoid. We were under attack, and we beat them. But even as we repaired equipment reset schedules and began fulfilling delayed orders, I couldn't shake the sense that the battle had left scars deeper than broken servers or frozen accounts. This wasn't just about one company or one man. It was about a system that allowed petty tyrants to bully under the cover of community rules. Ava warned me not to let my guard down. Yes, we froze their accounts, and yes, an independent administrator will dismantle what Hale built. But remember, these networks don't die in one stroke. There are allies, funders, people who benefited from the corruption. They'll try to salvage their power. Noah was blunter. Expect retaliation. Maybe not from Hale, but from someone else who sees you as the guy who broke the machine. They weren't wrong. The week after the injunction, I spotted unfamiliar cars idling near the property. Not Guardian City trucks this time, ordinary sedans, tinted windows, engines humming just a little too long before pulling away. Watching, waiting. Whether it was reporters fishing for a quote or remnants of Hale's network, I couldn't tell, but I kept the drones circling the cameras recording. Meanwhile, the association's board imploded. 3 members resigned within days, claiming ignorance of Hale's dealings. Others tried to spin themselves as whistleblowers. The independent administrator, appointed by the judge, moved fast, seizing files, locking offices, and reassuring the public that Lakeview would be rebuilt with integrity. The homeowners, long cowed into silence, began speaking openly about years of intimidation fines for harmless yard decorations, threats over parked cars, whispered warnings not to make waves. My fight had pulled the lid off something uglier than I'd imagined. The state attorney general's office opened a formal investigation. Subpoenas flew. Guardian City's warehouse was raided, boxes of documents hauled into vans. The same uniforms that had once swaggered around my property were now evidence bags in a corruption case. For me, the shift was surreal. Neighbors who had once avoided me at the grocery store now nodded respectfully, some even thanked me. One elderly man stopped me in the parking lot, his voice shaking. They fined me $500 for having my granddaughter's tricycle on the porch. I didn't think anyone could stand up to them, but you did. I wanted to tell him the truth, that I hadn't fought because I was brave, but because I was too stubborn to let anyone write rules for my land. But I just nodded because in that moment his relief mattered more than my motives. At Carter Systems, we doubled down on growth. Contracts that had been delayed were reinstated. Clients who had wavered returned, impressed by our resilience. Riley pushed the team harder than ever, reminding them, every order we fill is another reminder that they didn't break us. But even amid the success, I wrestled with unease. Victory had come at a cost: sleepless nights, frayed nerves, a paranoia that hadn't faded. I caught myself glancing at shadows too often, jumping at every unexplained noise. When you've been targeted so deliberately, normalcy feels like a trick. One evening, as I stood outside the office watching the sun bleed across the horizon, Noah joined me. He handed me a coffee and leaned against the railing. You know, he said, most people in your position would have folded. Paid the dues, swallowed their pride, called it peace. I took a long sip before answering. Maybe. But peace bought by submission isn't peace. It's surrender. He nodded slowly. You've burned their playbook. Whatever happens next, people will think twice before trying this again. That night, I finally allowed myself to breathe, not because the fight was truly over, but because I knew we had turned the tide. Hale was finished. The association, at least in its corrupt form, was dismantled, and Carter Systems stood stronger than ever. Weeks later, Ava called with news that put the final nail in Hale's coffin. The financial investigation uncovered embezzlement, not just payments to Guardian City, but siphoning of member dues into personal accounts. Fraud wire transfers, the works. He's facing multiple charges. He won't see daylight outside a courtroom for years. I didn't celebrate. I just sat in silence, letting the weight of it sink in. Hale had built his empire on control, intimidation, and illusion. Now it was rubble. The following week, I received a letter, not from the association, but from the new administrator. It was an apology printed on fresh letterhead, disavowing Hale and his cronies, promising transparency and reform. They even invited me to a community forum to discuss rebuilding trust. I tore the letter in half and dropped it in the trash. Some bridges aren't rebuilt. Some wounds don't need apologies. Instead, I poured my focus into the future. Carter Systems was expanding stronger for the fire it had walked through, and I, though scarred, was unbroken. As I stood once more on my property, the floodlights humming the fences tall and unyielding, I realized something: this had never been just about land or business. It was about principle, about refusing to let anyone dictate how I lived, how I worked, how I owned what was mine. And as long as I drew breath, no association, no president, no petty tyrant would ever take that from me again. Looking back now, I know not everyone could have fought this war. It demanded resources, stubbornness, allies, willing to risk their own names. But the lesson isn't that you need an army to stand your ground. It's that bullies, whether they wear uniforms, hold gavels, or hide behind HOA letterhead, thrive on silence. They win when good people decide it's easier to bend than resist. I learned that the real cost of independence isn't money or property, it's endurance. The willingness to take every punch, every threat, and still say, "No, this is mine." And sometimes when you refuse to bow, you inspire others to stand a little taller too. So if you've ever faced intimidation, whether from an HOA, a boss, or anyone who thinks power gives them the right to control you, know the choice. Bend or fight. I chose to fight, and I'll never regret it. Tell me, what battles have you fought in your own neighborhoods, your own lives? Drop a comment below. And if you believe in standing tall against bullies, subscribe, because more stories like this are coming.